Welcome to video lesson number 22. Today's lesson is on circle graphs. For this lesson today, you will need the notes you were given in class. That is TOC number 22. You will need a pencil and pen to take the majority of the notes, but you will also, and this is very important, need at least 4 different colored markers or colored pencils, crayons, something with different colors to be able to create the circle graph at the end. And you will need a calculator to do some calculations for this unit. So for your notes, just so you know, sometimes you've seen these before, I'm sure. You've probably studied them in elementary school. Circle graphs are also sometimes called pie charts or pie graphs. But circle graphs are just used to represent data, which is a fancy word for information, to show you the relationship between a part and a whole. And the important thing to know about circle graphs is they use percentages. It's comparing how much of the whole circle is what category. And they use those percentages to show how much and to create the circle graph. So here's 3 examples. We have this one, that's a 3D looking shape. Again, we have percentages there, and they use that little key to show what different colors mean and what categories those represent. We have this one that's a flat circle shape. Again, they're using the key on the right and all those different colors to represent the categories. So make sure you're picking colors that are not close together. And then this last example, that are music preferences, you'll notice this one looks a little bit different because some of that one pie piece is out of the rest of the circle. Sometimes they will do that where they separate different pieces to emphasize that piece. So just know that there's different ways that a circle graph can look, but again, they're all circle graphs. If they're comparing part to the whole, they're using categories, and they're using percentages, it's a circle graph. And it's in the shape of a circle, of course. All right, so looking at your page, we're going to look at these orange sections and talk about how to ballpark some of the sections and figure out what the percentages are using our understanding of fractions, decimals, and percents. So if you look at this first one in the top left, the shaded section, that's orange, it's the entire circle. So that would be 100% or the whole thing. And that fraction would just be a whole over a whole or 1 over 1. You could say 1 whole. All of those would be true. Looking at the second one, probably the next most easily recognized section, it's half or 50% of the circle is shaded orange. So those are some really easy ballparks. You're never going to see 100% as one category, but you're going to see something close sometimes. The 50% is probably the most important ballpark measurement to use to estimate the percentages of others. On the next row, you have this one on the left shows half of a half. What is half of 50%? That would be 25%. And we know from our fraction decimal percent unit that 25% is the same as 1/4 in my pocket, which is 1/4. It's 1/4. I've divided those into 4 sections. It'd only be one of the 4 sections. So again, that's another really easy ballpark measurement to use that will help you as you recognize and compare sections, because you can go a little bit more than that and be 30%. You can go a little bit less than that and be 20%. So that's a really easy one to use. Looking at the one on the right, this one also uses those 4 sections, but it's 50% plus that 25 is shaded orange, so that would be 75%. And if you think that's like having 3/4 in my pocket, so that's 3/4. So those are, again, 2 really important measurements to use when you're estimating or looking about how much of each graph is what percent. Okay, the last little one that we showed you, if you look at that, and this is why those funky shading things were there, this one is half of a quarter or half of 25%. Ask yourself or use your calculator, what is half of 25%? That would be 12.5%. If I take, and it's okay that it's a decimal, don't freak out, We're not going to round it up. We're just going to leave it like that, because if I took 12.5%, move my decimal 2 swoops to the left, then it's going to make 0.125 or 125 thousandths. And we know from our fraction decimal percent unit, that's a common fraction to remember, and that is the same as 1/8. So you could also think of it as 25% is 1/4. What's half of that? Multiply 1/4 times 1/2 and you get 1/8. So that would be if that's like a pizza. It's a pizza slice, basically. So that's another easy ballpark to use and you're going to see that in just a minute when we create our graph. The last one, there's nothing drawn there for you. So I want you to draw your best circle. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I want you to create one knowing those easy to remember fraction decimal percents. What's one you want to do? Don't use something we've used before. Don't do 50, don't do 75, don't do 1, don't do a quarter, don't do 12.5. Think of another one that would be fairly simple to do. If you don't know one, you can do this one. This one, if you look at it, I've got 3 sections, but only one of them is colored in. So it's 1/3. And if I think about what 1/3 is as a fraction decimal percent, it's a repeating decimal, 0.333333, which is same as 33.3%. If you put 33% and you leave off the 0.3 on this, that's okay. But mathematically, you want to remember that 1/3 is 33.3 repeating percent. So I could also do 2/3, which would be a little bit less than 75%, but more than 50. So that's an easy way to remember it. So there's some ballparks that you can use that we didn't cover. Okay, flip your paper over, because not only do you have to recognize each section and be able to estimate and answer questions about it, you have to be able to compare it to other graphs, which we're going to do in our next couple lessons, but you also have to know how to construct circle graphs, which is a little bit on the tedious side. It ties in our fraction decimal percents, but it's not as hard as you think, but you have to be pretty exact. The good news is you're not going to have to construct an actual graph on your SOL. You will in class, but you won't have to do it on your SOL. So here's how you do it. Number 1, in order to compare something to the whole, you have to know what the whole is. So you have to determine the total. Okay, then number 2, once you have how much the whole is and have added up all of the survey pieces, then you have to write each of the categories, each piece of data, as a decimal. Here's where your calculator comes in, because you have to put your amount that picked that category out of your total, which is your denominator, and you're going to divide. In your fraction decimal percent unit, you don't get a calculator, but for this unit, you do. Just remember, it is top divided by bottom. So when you put them in the calculator, you put in the top number, then you hit the divided by button, and then you divide by that bottom number. So once you've turned everything into a decimal, and typically they'll give you a chart to do this, then you're going to turn each decimal into a percent, because that percent is how you draw your circle graph. You can't draw the circle graph without the percent. So most of the time you can use those ballpark measurements, those important measurements that we use, those common fractions, 50%, 25%, 12.5%, and 75%. 33% is a little bit harder to use, but you can use it. But you can use those to ballpark and you draw some of your graph. We will also teach you how to use what's called the central angle and a protractor, but you're only going to have to do that a couple times in class. Most of the time you're looking at a graph and comparing it with another graph, so it's not going to be a whole lot of constructing. And here's how you make it. Here's where you're going to need the markers in just a second. Okay, so for our example, Tab Middle School did a survey of 100 students to see their favorite ice cream flavors. Complete the table and show the results of the survey in the circle graph. Make sure to have a title and a key on your graph. Okay, if you had read that question, which I know a lot of you do not, you would know how many the total is. Your first job is to find that total. It says it in the problem. I don't have to do any math. They surveyed 100 students, so my total, ding, 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 is 100. Of course, for this example, we're going to make it easy. Anything that has a denominator of 100, you can take the numerator and make it a percent. So you don't really need your calculator for this one. You can use it if you want to. So once you have your total, you make that your denominator in your ratio. Remember, a ratio is just a fancy word for a fraction. So, first example, category. It says kinds of music. I just realized that. It's supposed to say flavors of ice cream. Oops. No, you don't get candy, don't ask. Okay, cookies and cream. That's the first ice cream flavor. 26 people out of the total, which was 100. That's your ratio. 26 out of 100. I did not simplify this one. You could, but I did not. If I did, it's going to be very close to 1/4. So take your 26, make it your percent because it's over 100. Mint chip is 11 out of 100, and that makes 11%. Bubblegum, go figure, it's middle school. 50% of the students liked bubblegum ice cream. 50%, and I did simplify this one to show you that you should simplify them, and I know that 50% is going to simplify to a half, so I really didn't have to do any math. Okay, that would be 50%, and then cookie dough is 13% because it's 13 over 100. Make sure you have your chart filled in. Okay, so our next job is to create the circle graph from the chart. For those of you that did not get that chart copied, I put it in the bottom right corner so you can frantically copy it down while I'm talking. Okay, here is where you need those 4 different colors. So you're going to need a color for cookies and cream, a color for mint chip, a color for bubblegum, and a color for cookie dough. For my examples, I used blue for cookies and cream, pink for mint chip, green for bubblegum, and I know I should have made bubblegum pink and mint chip green. Oh well. And cookie dough orange. So once you have your colors, color them in so you have that for your key, and then we're going to jump in for making the graph. To make my graph, I'm going to choose the easiest section to draw first. So I like to start with the largest section, which for this one is bubblegum. And it's easy because it's 50%. 50% is half. We're going to color half the graph for bubblegum. So here's my half of the graph for bubblegum. And it's green. I know. So I color it in, and then I'm going to label it bubblegum. Do I have to label it bubblegum? I do not, because the color and the key tell me what the category is. You could just put the percent, 50%. You could also, sometimes they're going to put the number of people that selected that. So they're going to do it both ways on circle graphs. The next biggest section is my cookies and cream section, and that's 26%. We know from the ballpark figures that we did at the beginning that that is a smidge, just a smidge, barely, 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 over 25. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in. Mine looks like it's right at 25, but it is just a smidge because of that black line. So again, it should be just a hair over that dotted line, and color that in and label it cookies and cream. 26 people selected that. The last 2 sections are 11 and 13. Think about half of 25 is 12.5. So it's almost half. Just the cookie dough section is going to be a little bit more, just a little bit, not a lot. So if you look here, my cookie dough section is slightly more than mint chip. You can't really even tell. But if you make it close enough, we're going to look at it and give it to you. Like I said, you don't have to construct this for your SOL. You just have to be able to read it and compare it to another graph. So here's what your chart should look like. Make sure you label it, add in those amounts, and you should be good to go. And that's all, folks. Now it's time to show what you know log in and take your homework quiz online.